Welcome to Divorce Without Destruction Mediation Podcast.
Welcome to Divorce Without Destruction Mediation Podcast with Resolution Mediation. Tess, Worrell, and Hillary Sharpnack help Indiana couples navigate divorce and separation in a more peaceful, informed, and future-focused way through mediation. Instead of turning family conflict into courtroom battles, they help people protect their children, preserve their finances, and create agreements that support life moving forward. I'm Lisa Mosbey, your host, and today we're talking about what divorce mediation actually looks like in Indiana and why more couples are choosing it over the traditional court process. Welcome, Tess. Welcome, Hillary. Thanks for joining me today.
Hello.
Thank you.
Tess, before we get into mediation itself, can you each share a little about your background and what led you to this kind of work?
Certainly. Thank you. I will tell potential clients that I mediate today by and large because of a homeless woman living under a bridge. Now, professionally, I became a mediator after I am an attorney. I worked for the Indiana Supreme Court as a staff attorney and then as the executive director of one of their agencies. And that agency created the training requirements for mediators. So one of my roles was taking a bunch of mediation training and bringing back recommendations to the board on what the training requirements should be in Indiana. And in the process, I fell in love with mediation. My undergraduate training was a combination of biology, psychology, and sociology. So just helping people who are in crisis in a holistic way, and saw that mediation was the way you could do that kind of work for people in a legal crisis. And because divorce is not just legal, it's financial. It's parenting, it's lifestyle. It touches every area of life. I was pretty excited about the opportunity to serve families in a more holistic way. So at birth of child number 4, I stepped away from the agency and started doing mediation. At birth of child number 6, I threw in the towel and was home full time, eventually had 8 children, which was wonderful. And I practiced mediating who gets the last cookie, who goes first on the swing. But then my husband wanted a divorce. And I had to go back to work and quickly found out that people vastly preferred hiring attorneys fresh out of law school as opposed to women who'd been home for a while. And so had a huge difficulty finding employment. And I was piecing together jobs. And on the way home from one of them, I would always pass this homeless woman living under a bridge. And I would always make sure I had something for her because I felt terrible for her. And also realized we were maybe 3 weeks away from me asking her, can my children and I move in next to you? Because my divorce left me pretty devastated. And so my hope has always been to come at this work with the legal brain of how to help people make very well-informed decisions and move forward, but also that I never want someone to go through what I went through brain and making this not destructive, but a process that they can step into and come out well on the other side.
Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Hillary, do you want to share your position on this and how you got involved in this kind of work?
Sure, of course. So completely different than Tess. I come from actually the human resources world. So I was in the corporate human resources world at a large company in my previous life and was there for a long, long time, always involved in the employee relations side of things in the conflict resolution world. And really, I enjoyed it. Just really enjoy kind of learning about the conflict, working with other HR professionals to resolve the conflicts within their departments, talk through different strategies, problems, etc. But frankly, I just got burned out of the corporate environment and really felt kind of boxed in by corporate policies and, worrying about having to set precedents rather than just being able to resolve the problem and do what's best for everybody involved. So I stepped away from the corporate world, went back to school and got a master's in conflict resolution and reconciliation. And through that program, learned about family mediation and decided that's really what I wanted to do, was still resolve conflict, be in the conflict resolution world, but on a more personal level, helping families, people going through, as Tess mentioned, just through a personal crisis. So that's really where I come at it from, not only the business side and the HR world, but coming into it from a more personal standpoint of wanting to help resolve conflict.
Ladies, we have the head, the heart, the compassion, everything that we need when we're going through one of the most emotional times in our lives, we find in your company, your business. Can you help us to better understand what is divorce mediation and what helps it or what makes it different from the traditional divorce process?
Well, in talking about how they are the same first, both processes deal with the same issues. Both processes handle divorce from start to finish, come up with agreements that are enforceable by a court. Both processes deal with the same information, the same number of houses, bank accounts, debts, the same 7 days of a week for a parenting plan. So that's how they're the same. They are different in that the court process is very intentionally adversarial. It is A versus B. And many attorneys take very seriously their job. It is my job to win for my client. Other attorneys do have a more collaborative eye. They want to focus on the well-being of the family. States, I think, have decided we need to also focus on the well-being of the family. But the way they do that is to create a state definition of fair. In Indiana, it is fair to divide property 50-50. Regardless of what each person makes, regardless of how each person's going to do moving forward, you divide everything 50-50. You tell the parents, these are the days and times you get to see your children. And it's kind of a one-size-fits-all approach. I have bought a one-size-fits-all outfit. It didn't work so well for me. And that's where I think families find themselves. These imposed, the same thing will work for everybody, doesn't work as they're trying to care for children with special needs or parents with odd work schedules or financial situations, which are very difficult. And that's where mediation is different. In mediation, we are following those same issues and we're working with that same database, but we are focused on providing information to the spouses to say, here's all the different options you have for addressing the finances or for creating a parenting plan. Here are the pros and cons of each one of those options. We make sure both people have all the information they need to make very well-informed decisions and understand how those decisions are going to work moving forward. And then they make the decisions for their situation. They decide, here's what we're going to do with our money. They decide, here's how we are going to care for our children. Mm-hmm. Here's the timeline we're going to have for moving forward. And we put their decisions into a legally binding agreement, file it with the court. It's enforceable by the court. But the people who have to live the decisions are making the decisions, and they're doing so in the privacy of our office, not in the public arena of a court hearing.
Would you say that it's fair to call it communication assistance? As I'm listening to you, what a pleasant experience as you're parting and separating all of your belongings and still trying to make a life as you move forward. And you're there to help people communicate through that process rather than creating this adversarial position. Hillary, do you want to chime in on that?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing we talk a lot about with clients is kind of in the traditional adversarial approach or process. A lot of times the messages don't talk to each other. Let me, as your attorney, do all the talking. Whereas in our process, we're we're forcing, for lack of better words, we're forcing that communication because they are the decision makers. They're the ones that have to live with these decisions moving forward. And especially if they're parents, you still have to co-parent together.
Mhm.
So not only are you communicating in the legal process, or you need to communicate, we're also kind of setting that foundation of how are you going to continue communicating going forward when you're still co-parents, because you're going to still have to be co-parents. So yeah, we're absolutely working through a lot of the communication issues in the mediation process that we hope carry forward, especially in a co-parenting relationship.
Let's jump into that, Tess. What does the mediation process usually look like from the very first meeting through the final agreement?
Well, there are a couple of layers to that. So I'll do one and let Hillary do the other.
Okay.
The legal timeline is in Indiana, divorce starts with the filing of what's known as a petition for dissolution. A petition is a request, so it's a request to the court to dissolve this marriage. In Indiana, a judge cannot grant a divorce in less than 60 days. That litigation process almost never gets done in less than a year and often can go 2, 3 years. But you cannot get done in less than 60 days. And so the timeline for people to be thinking about is, they're not going to file for divorce and get divorced next week. In our mediation process, many couples have come to their entire agreement within that 60 days. And so we wait until day 61, file their agreement, and they move forward. Other couples do need longer to navigate making the decisions. We never want to rush people. We want to make sure they are confident in their decisions before they become legally binding, but we're also helping them, as you noted earlier, communicate well and come to those decisions once they have the information they need. And so you can talk about the actual.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in our mediation process, so there's kind of two versions of mediation, at least in Indiana. There's called Shuttle mediation, which is usually where one client's in one room, usually they have an attorney, and then the other client is in another room, usually with an attorney, and the mediator is shuttling back and forth. And typically, if it's a court-ordered mediation, that's the style of mediation that is practiced. And it's usually kind of called a marathon mediation, where you start at 9 a.m. in the morning and you go for as long as it takes till either both people reach an agreement and they sign that agreement, or somebody walks away and says, I'm done. So it can go 6, 8, 10 plus hours until, again, somebody either says, yes, we're reaching an agreement, or somebody walks away. That is not how we practice. So the way we practice is we meet in 2-hour sessions. So we use that 2 hours. We come to as many decisions as we can during that session. And then the number of sessions that each couple needs is purely dependent on how quickly they're making decisions, how much time they need to make those decisions. But what we tend to tell prospective clients is that, especially if you have children and you're divorcing or legally separating, it's usually anywhere between 4 and 8, sometimes 9 sessions that is needed for the entire mediation process. If there's no children, so you don't have the parenting side of things, or it's a very simple, non-complex divorce, it can really be a few sessions, but generally we haven't seen less than 3 sessions. So that's where we kind of average that 4, 8, 9 sessions for each couple.
And I imagine that you see a lot of issues come up. What are some of the more common issues? I know children and finances are probably 1 and 2, but what are some of the more common issues that couples usually need to work through during that mediation session or those sessions?
A huge issue for families, especially if there are children, is the house. In the current housing market, with interest rates being much higher than they'd been for a long time, it is incredibly difficult for one spouse to refinance in their own name and also buy out the equity of the other spouse. It just puts the house payment beyond what either person can do. So we've helped people get pretty creative around how do you keep the house so children can stay in their school and provide some stability financially. So the spouse that's not staying in the house has a place to live and also parent. And that's probably, I would say, the biggest challenge that parents with children are facing right now. You think of others?
No, I think just kind of going back to the communication side of things is there's often been a really big or significant breakdown in communication. And so when they come to us, we see that breakdown. And so really a lot of it is how do we help bridge that communication gap?
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, those are kind of the two biggest that come to mind.
And I know from my experience, many people assume mediation only works if both spouses already agree on everything.
Mhm.
Can mediation still work when there's conflict or tension between the couple?
Absolutely.
Yes.
That's what mediators are trained to do. Mediators are, and as an attorney, I cannot use the word expert. I want to be really clear on that. But we are trained in conflict resolution skills. The training is how do you take people that are in very different places with very different ideas about what should happen and help them come together, find agreement that they both can live with.
Mhm.
And we do that by listening and helping each person uncover not just the position they have, because attorneys in the litigation process tend to battle positions.
Mhm.
What we're doing is saying, what is the underlying desire? What is the underlying goal? What is the underlying fear that this person has that we can address? And once those are communicated well, we can often offer solutions, but I am surprised by the number of times when one spouse says, here's what I'm trying to get at.
Mhm.
The other one goes, oh, I didn't realize that's what you were thinking. Well, what if we did this? And they are creating the solutions, and that's a beautiful moment.
I like that you create the safe space for people to have those conversations.
Yes.
What helps mediation conversations stay productive when emotions are running high? Do you have some tips or tricks, a little secret magic that you can share with us?
Gosh, Tess is probably better to answer this question only because I just based off of my experience and my background and probably just my overarching personality, I tend to be very kind of direct in the sense of we have this decision to make. We need to kind of come back to and circle back around to this decision. Not that I'm trying to dismiss emotions or dismiss feelings, but I tend to bring kind of that emotional conflict level down pretty quickly in the sense of, listen, this is your time and we want to be as productive as much as possible. So in order to be productive, we still have to make these decisions. So it's just bringing it back to the actual kind of decision that we're looking at and the options that we have. Again, I want to be clear. I don't try to dismiss or discredit anybody's emotions or feelings, but just based off of me, I tend to kind of shut that down pretty quickly to bring it back to the decision because I want the session to be as productive as possible. But I'll let Tess speak because again, she's got more tips and tools that I am learning from constantly from her.
We tend to, and Hillary does it very well as well. We ask what questions?
Absolutely.
What about that is important to you? Or what about this proposal that you're not agreeing to? What is of concern? What are the limits of that? What of that can you accept? What would you offer as a change? Those what questions can again get away from positions and down to what's underneath. We also offer the opportunity to speak with us one-on-one. So if somebody's got a lot going on in their head that either they don't feel safe sharing with the other person or they're not sure how to say it without creating more tension, once they're able to get those thoughts out, often we can come up with other factors to help people come to agreement. And we can all take a break. It's not
Mhm.
unusual to say, how about would you we are our office is very close to a park. And so we can say, would you like to just go take 5 minutes and walk in the park and just kind of have a moment? And it's a wonderful resource for people who are feeling a little overwhelmed and just need to breathe deeply for a minute or two.
I get a sense that it's a very peaceful process working with both of you because I know how calm I'm feeling at the moment, listening to how you walk through this with folks. Really, truly, I can sense that energy and that feeling of how this would be much healthier for both parties involved, as well as the children, to be able to walk through this process in this way. So thank you so much for your insights today.
Thank
Thank you.
That's it for today's episode of Divorce Without Destruction Mediation Podcast with Resolution Mediation. If you'd like to learn more about Tess Worrell and Hillary Sharpnack and the mediation services they offer across Indiana, visit resolutionmediationin.com. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share the show with someone who may need it. Come on back next time. We'll see you there.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.